Well, good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock, or to be precise, 11:01 on Tuesday morning. And as you know, every Tuesday morning on our channels, we get on Facebook, we get on Instagram, we get on YouTube, we get on just about every platform to talk about real estate. I'm Stuart Fournier. I'm a 25-year veteran of the real estate world here in Los Angeles, specifically the South Bay. And it's my pleasure to introduce my lovely co-host.
Hello, everyone. It's Anastasia. I am your loan queen. I am a mortgage broker, also out of the South Bay in Southern California, and I'm also licensed in Texas and Florida. Hello, Stuart. I'm better
Good.
now. Sorry
How
for missing last week.
Oh no, that's
That's what
okay.
that's what happens when you have small kids and they come home with, snots. The parents get it, and then I was out of commission most of the week actually. So I'm happy to be better today.
It's part of the drill. What can you say? So yeah, I've
Exactly.
been lucky. So uh, actually, I've been lucky for almost 2 years. Haven't gotten sick in 2 years. Have no idea
That
why.
was my first time. I know that was my first time, I think, in over 3 years. So that it,
Wow.
it, it was unprecedented. I'm usually not one to get sick. So, anyways, thank you
Good.
for allowing me to take a rest. My voice was in no condition to speak last week, but today I'm very excited to share about how we make money. How do we
Right.
get compensated from the transaction?
So what we
Yeah,
like to
many
do
many
on
of my
this
clients definitely ask. Yeah.
what we like to do on this show is get a little brave and talk about things you may not normally hear with your typical podcasts and such, especially as it relates to the South Bay. And today, Anastasia and I are going to lay our cards on the table and tell you exactly how we get paid and how most
Yeah.
mortgage brokers, I should say most because I'm not sure exactly if every company is the same, but I will tell you how realtors get paid and what you should expect to be typical. And then I want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the last year and a half because there's been a lot of controversy about that. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do
Okay,
it.
let's get started. So, again, if you have any questions or you want to join in the conversation, please feel free to put a comment in the comment section. We will see that on the screen right now. Or if you are seeing this on a recording, you can do that as well. Leave a comment. We will get back to you and talk to you. So, feel free to interact with us. So, what I wanted to talk about today is what's happened in the last year and a half, respective of how the press has been talking about how realtors are compensated. And as you know, about a year and a half ago, there was kind of a tectonic uh, um, ruling from a jury in Missouri that actually affected the entire nation of
A
realtors. Now,
jury of renters.
a jury of renters,
I
right?
want to
Not
just mention that in that they made a they were talking about the importance of home ownership and how each party should be compensated, but they actually have never themselves been through a transaction because they were all renters.
Right. And to make a very, very long story short, the National Association of Realtors and people in all these companies that were sued uh, didn't appeal it. They decided to just take the judgment itself. And again, I don't want to get into the details. It's a very long subject. Happy to talk to anybody about it if they want to talk about it. I do have followed it thoroughly. But the bottom line is that yeah, my dog is going to chime in because once he hears a siren, it's all over. But anyway, uh, what happened was the case was a antitrust case. And with antitrust, basically, I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving any legal advice. My understanding is that it's a case that the government can bring, and in this case, a civil lawsuit was filed over the fact that realtors talk amongst one another about what the commission structure would be. Now, in all honesty, uh, that was
Which
something that
was
was
perceived to be collusion, right? That's the whole
ex-
point of the lawsuit
exactly. Thank
is,
you.
is realtors were colluding against with each other and not letting that information be public to a degree.
Well, You got half of that right. We always let our clients know what the structure was. In California, it was on the contract where it described and you signed that work or that paperwork that said you have an understanding of how our commission structure works. So there was never anything hidden. But essentially, what happened was these attorneys found fault with the fact that realtors could talk about this prior to putting it on the MLS. And so they felt that in some way, maybe in a lot of ways, I don't know, that that was collusion of some sort. Now, in my opinion, it's collusion if you don't tell people. But in this case, we always did. And certainly in California, as I said before, it was on the contract. So there was never a secretive issue about it. But rather than fight it and take another 10 years to decide it in the Supreme Court of the United States, the realtors just decided, okay, what we can do is make two adjustments. And one adjustment is that we will ask the buyer's agents uh, to have the option to pay the buyer's side of the commission. Now, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today because it's been over a year and a half that we've applied in our contracts and in our presentations and in our representation that sort of new way of doing things. And what we have found in the last year and a half, actually, let me back up a little bit, just for those of you that aren't completely, uh, you know, uh, uh, know about how our structure works. We basically charge between 5 and 6% to sell your house. Now, in the past, what we would do is take half of that 5 or 6%, and if another agent brought us a buyer, we would give half of that percentage to the buyer's agent. That was traditionally what we used to do. Now, what happened as a result of this lawsuit was we agreed, okay, that is no longer going to be what's understood up front. What's going to be understood up front is if I charge you as a seller 5%, you don't necessarily have to give me that 5%. You can give 3%, you can give 2%. By the way, I know to not make things more confusing, you always had the option to do. But what happened was the buyer's agents would basically be cut out at that point. In other words, the buyer's agents would come in, and if a seller decided, I don't want to pay a fee to the buyer's agents, they had the right not to, they now have the right not to do that. So honestly, we knew that it would be very difficult for basically buyer's agents to not be able to make a living because the sellers would just simply not pay. And so when that started out, we didn't know what was going to happen. We had to emphasize, in accordance with our rules, that if you were a seller, we charged you, but you didn't necessarily have to pay a buyer's commission. And we knew that instinctively that was going to be a problem because obviously there would be no more buyer's agents, and that wasn't going to happen. So we waited it's been about a year and a half now. And what we have seen is that most sellers realize if I want to get my house shown, I have to have a buyer's agent show it to us. I have to have an agent that represents someone that's going to come to my house and buy my house. If I'm not going to pay that person, then there's little chance that someone's going to bring someone. That's just pretty logical, right? So
Did you
even
see
though
initially a little like maybe a slowed in transactions the first maybe 3 or 6 months, in your opinion? Because I personally did see that when sellers came and did not offer any compensation to the buyer's agent. The buyer agent then had to be compensated through the buyer. And if the buyer had no funds to compensate their own agent, then they just simply walked away from that transaction, not had the opportunity to show that home. So did you feel like there was maybe a gap in transactions or a little slowdown initially before all of that wore off?
And the answer is no. There may
Okay.
have been a slowdown uh, at that time for other reasons. that you experienced. However, the reason I'm bringing the subject up today is that after a year and a half, I have not run into one situation where a seller said, I'm not going to pay the buyer's agent. Not one single
Yep.
time. I've heard it happen. And so people, there may be a circumstance here and there where a seller refused to pay. But I think after a year and a half, we've seen a pattern that really hasn't changed a thing. And that's kind of the good news. I think it's good news because uh, to sell your home, you want as much exposure as possible. And exposure requires that other people that want to bring a buyer to your house have compensation. So most sellers realize if I want that to happen, if I want to sell my home, I'm going to have to compensate someone that's going to bring that person to me. And so after a year and a half, that situation has not changed whatsoever. The only real change that has happened, of course, is that now, as a result of this new structure, you as a buyer now have to sign a contract before a realtor can even show you a home. And let me emphasize
Mhm.
that if you are working with a realtor that has not asked you to sign an agreement prior to showing you a home, and let me emphasize, prior to showing you any home, you're dealing with someone who's breaking the rules, and it's something to consider. I'm not saying it's happening on a large scale, but I know it's happened. I've seen it happen, but it shouldn't be happening, and it'll give you a good idea of who you're working with. So let that be, sort of a red
And it's
flag
not
to you.
even the rules now, it's officially law in California. I know not every state has adhered and made it law. Sometimes, in other states, it is still something to be of a suggestion, but
Correct.
it is law in California.
Correct. And let me just clean it up a little bit by saying yes, and this was the biggest and the largest misleading aspect of how the media actually initially reported that change way back in a year and a half ago. The media focused on the commission amounts. The media was totally obsessed with talking about how now this was going to bring commissions down. They lost sight of
Mhm.
what the real ruling was, which had to do with an antitrust situation. So, this idea that all of a sudden houses were going to cost less because of the commission as it relates to the price of the house, we knew at the time was totally misunderstood. Nobody was really understanding that this was not a commission uh, amount argument, it was an antitrust uh, um, relationship argument. And so we as realtors knew that the commission structure was not, or that traditional commission structure was not going to change too much. But we had no idea how the sellers were going to react to it. And I can tell you that the good news is that even after a year and a half, we've pretty much seen the sellers agree. Well, gee, if I want to sell my house, I really do need to have a buyer's agent come and help
Yeah.
us.
I have seen in my end where, if the initial fee structure between a buyer and his or her agent is 3%, I have seen on the reverse flip side, the seller's only offering 2%. And then further negotiation has to occur between the buyer's agent, the buyer, whether or not they agree that now there's a gap in the commissions. Do they agree to the lower commission, or does the buyer need to be out of pocket for the difference? So I have seen in some of my deals where the buyer has to come up with a difference out of pocket for the 0.5%, 1%, or however much the difference is. And the lender now needs access to these documents and these, um, the buyer agent broker fee agreement, because now the cash to close could be different, because now
Exactly.
it's not just the down payment and closing costs. Now we have to consider how much is the buyer's agent getting in that transaction, and is there a
Exactly.
difference between
A-
what's offered and what they're getting.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because for those of you out there that think our commissions are hidden or at the end we throw fees in and things like that, all that's gone out the window in the last 10 to 15 years. Whether that was the way things were done in the past, I'm not going to speak to because sometimes I felt that was the case. But everything is completely disclosed now. Many of you will become overwhelmed with the paperwork in a transaction. And that's understandable. But one of the reasons that sometimes you get overwhelmed with all the paperwork is that everything has to be disclosed, as Anastasia just brilliantly pointed out. Even if it's a uh, 0.0018 interest rate increase at the end, it has to be disclosed to you before there's a close of your particular situation. And so that is something you want to review and make sure you feel good about at the end of a transaction, at the close of escrow, is that you have a complete and full understanding of every single penny that you're paying for,
Yeah.
because it is on paper,
No,
it is there, and you have the right to dispute it if that's not what happens in the end.
for sure. So yeah, the good points on the agent commission structure and compensation model and the changes that have occurred. And then I want to briefly mention that the two differences with how an agent gets paid and how a loan officer gets paid, it is different. The agent gets paid a percentage of the purchase price, while the loan officer gets compensated on a percentage of the loan amount. And sometimes there is a discrepancy between the two. If somebody's coming in with a larger down payment, which does happen, if one is selling a property and now they want something larger, the down payment is going to be significantly more. So the compensation for a loan officer could be, 10 times less than what it is for for a realtor. And one of the things that I always like to encourage is to review the loan estimate, and origination fees is what somebody needs to review specifically. Is the loan officer charging points to give you a certain rate? Because it's not always about the rate. What we try to do in the broker world is match the credit that we're giving. There's a lender credit, and that's offset by our commissions. Long story short, you don't want any additional loan costs on the loan, in my opinion. There are certain circumstances, depending on the individual situation, where we would want to have a reduced rate because maybe for qualifying, or maybe they're going to retire soon and they won't have the ability to refinance in the future. So I myself like to always ask in advance, what does your next 5 years look like, especially for somebody who's older? you know don't always assume that person will have the ability to refinance in the future for a lower rate, especially
Right,
if they don't have a job, to
right,
no longer being able to refinance that. So that's
right.
how we're paid, is based on the loan amount. It's a smaller percentage, usually between 1 to 1.5% on average, as opposed to a realtor gets paid on average 2 to 3% of the purchase price.
Right.
And that's
Well,
it.
they're two different worlds, and we have two different types of
Yeah,
expenses. I don't want to compare one to the other, but what's interesting about your
for sure.
situation,
Different jobs.
right?
Yeah.
What's interesting about your situation is that when you're shopping for loans, obviously that's a variable as well. So when you go into escrow with a realtor, the commissions are right up front. Everybody knows about it. With mortgages, it's a different story because you're actually shopping from the point of going into, um, you know,
Yeah.
into escrow and understanding what your variables are. So that's going to do it. We're about 18 and a half minutes into our 20-minute cutoff point where they'll cut us off the air. So we thank you for listening to us. If you have any questions about buying or selling in the South Bay, please feel free to give me a call. Randy and I have been practicing for 26 years now. We've handled every aspect of residential real estate that you can imagine. And Anastasia, want to give yourself a plug here at the end?
Sure, sure. I'd love to. So thank you so much. I actually just been named Affiliate of the Year with the Palos Verdes Association of Realtors. I'm a huge advocate of the South Bay. So if there's anyone who is buying, selling, refinancing, taking equity out, I would be happy to provide complimentary consultation. And that's
Fantastic.
me. Thank you.
All righty. We'll see you next time on Sand to Soul. We're here every Tuesday at 11 a.m. If you have a subject matter you'd like us to cover, situation you'd like us to talk about, we're more than happy to do that. We'll see you next time, everyone, on Sand to Soul, 11 o'clock, Tuesdays. Bye, everybody.